good afternoon and welcome to the Ayurvedic Association of Canada webinar for January, Why Mental Health Matters. I'm usually the host of the webinars, but today I'm also going to be the speaker. It's not something normal. I think mental health is a very important subject today, even more so than ever after COVID. And Ayurveda has many, many interesting tools and ways of being that can help all of us in our mental health journey. So I am an Ayurvedic practitioner. I just completed my Ayurvedic doctoral certification. I'm also a yoga and somatic therapist. So what does that mean? Yoga is not just asana, but it has to do with pranayama and meditation and mantra and mudra and all different aspects of yoga. So I do that. And I was trained in somatic therapy. So that means body movement and why people do certain things with their body. I'm also an Ayurvedic trainer, and I teach seminars on my website on mindfulness, on beauty, on food. So that's kind of a rundown of what I do. In this series that we're going to do over the next 4 months, I'm going to give you a general overview of the concept of mental health in Ayurveda. And next month, we're going to have someone who's going to speak specifically on Abhyanga and how it helps with mental health. The following month in March, we're going to have a presentation done by a sound therapist from Eastern Canada, and he will speak about how important sound therapy is. We know that, in Ayurveda, we use 5 sense therapy a lot. All our senses need to be balanced. And so he will speak on that. And then lastly, the following month, hold on, I lost my picture. The following month, the last month, I'm going to co-host a webinar with another Ayurvedic doctor on food and spices and how the foods that you eat and the spices that you consume can be a very positive influence on your mental health. So I'll begin. So mental health in Ayurveda. It's now known that at least 1 in 5 people today have mental health issues. Today, 1 in 25 have severe mental health issues, and most people with mental health imbalances go undiagnosed. In Ayurveda, it's more about seeking health in terms of how you live your life and the foods that you eat and the daily lifestyle processes that you have than just taking herbs. In the West, we've been definitely taught that from a mental health point of view, the 2 most important things are drugs, pharmaceuticals of some kind, and maybe some talk therapy. But most of my clients or patients that I've had will say that that'll be the first line that a doctor will take if somebody is having issues with mental health, be it anxiety, depression, or something worse than that. So in Ayurveda, I was taught that the lotus is a wonderful representation of how we should live our lives. The lotus is a flower that comes out of the muddy water. It moves through the dirty water and it emerges into the world as a beautiful flower. And if mud is placed on the lotus will just let it slide off. And it always keeps a really clean, pure fragrance to it. So for all of us, I think there's really great learning in using the lotus, because all of us can be born in the dirt or be born into situations that aren't that wonderful. All of us work through a life where there is turmoil or dirty water in our lives. But if it's not what we do, but what happens when we surface in the world that we live in. So it's not what happens to us, But what do we do with what happens to us? And I think Ayurveda will give you a great insight into the things you can do to help yourself. So when I deal with clients, what I do is teach them to have their own toolbox, right? Every single one of us needs a different toolbox to move through the world. So everybody here kind of knows about Ayurveda. If you're a Vata, Pitta, Kapha, a combination of them, if your mind is more Rajasic or Tamasic, that would mean that you would need to look in your toolbox in a different way than someone else does. And that's one of the really beautiful things about Ayurveda. It is so unique to you so that you know what you need to always be that fragrant, clean, beautiful flower that sits on the muddy water. So here's the definition of Ayurveda of your mind and your body. So you need balanced doshas, balanced Agni, balanced Dhatus, the malas, the wastes in your body need to be balanced. All the sensory inputs need to have some balance in them. Our soul and our mind need to be happy and in the correct space. And so I love this picture of the gentleman surfing, because it's like all the turmoil in the world that runs around us. And as the Buddha says, suffering is life, right? So there's always something going on, the waves are a really nice symbol of that turbulence that we can have in our life. But you can be just like the surfer, that you move through that turbulence of the water in your life and stay balanced and stay in a place where the whole of all that turbulence around you can be going on, but you are in control of the turbulence. You are in control of staying on your board, staying centered, and being able to move through the wave or to be able to move through life. So as we all know here, Ayurveda and yoga are sister sciences, right? So yoga becomes Ayurveda. Me as a yoga therapist, it becomes Ayurveda when I use it in a clinical manner, right? So going to a yoga studio is not using Ayurveda or yoga in a clinical manner. Not that it doesn't help, it does. Going to a studio, doing asana. But to really combine Ayurveda and yoga together is more clinical. So in the Yoga Sutras, the very first sutra asks you or tells you that the most important thing for you to be able to do is to be able to decrease or balance the fluctuations in your mind. Right? Yoga Chit Priti Nirodha. So that's what it means, to be able to balance those fluctuations. So from the yoga point of view, the yoga aspect of healing in the yoga Ayurveda science is more about the spiritual mental end of it. And the Ayurvedic piece is more about the physical piece and the herbs. But we need all of them to be able to live a balanced life. So in Ayurveda, the mind is one-centered. It's omnipresent, which means it's in every cell in your body, and it's mobile. The head is one of the seats where your mind is seated, is one of the major three marmas in your body. So in Ayurveda, those major three marmas are the most important ones to take care of. It is also the seat of Pranavahasrota. So we need to be mindful that we keep prana, the subdosha of Vata called prana, in balance to be able to keep our mind in balance. So that can take us back to yoga, right? To being able to balance the fluctuations in the mind. And we know from yoga that one of the most important ways that you can start to balance your mind is to do pranayama and learn how to breathe. I believe that with all the patients I've seen over the last 8 years, one of the problems with that is people do not know how to breathe. So they start doing different kinds of pranayama without having an understanding of what a full breath what prana means in the body. And so that's why I think it's important for someone to go to a practitioner or someone who's knowledgeable in the art of pranayama to be able to learn how to get the prana to start working regularly in your body. So it's very much connected to the Vata dosha, right? The whole central nervous system, what we call the Majjhalahrasrota. So in Ayurveda, the tridoshic theory is the main theory in Ayurveda about who we are. Those doshas are bioenergies. They're not physical things in our body. So those bioenergies, depending on their elemental makeup and their gunic makeup, make us who we are. So in Ayurveda, if you do not know who you are, it's very hard to take the journey of Ayurveda. So we get to know who we are physically because those doshas impact every tissue in our body, and there's much tissue in our mind that also needs to be regulated. So we are born with a makeup, a prakriti, and we are born with a gunic prakriti in our mind. The thing is, your physical prakriti can never change, but the gunas in the mind, which are sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, can change over your lifetime. So they can change in both directions, depending on what kind of practices you are doing, how you are eating, how you are living your life, and your understanding of being mindful about who you are. It's one of the first pieces that I always teach is mindfulness. Because we have behaviors in our life that do not serve us and they do not serve other people, and we keep doing them over and over and over again. And then we just tell ourselves, oh, that's just the way my mind works. In Ayurveda, that is actually not true. You're not going to be able to change the structure of your bones, but you are going to be able to become more balanced, more sattvic, and less rajasic, less fiery and, all over the place, or less tamasic, less depressed, by doing yogic practices, by eating the right food, by drinking the right amount of water, maybe by taking some herbs. And the interesting thing that I see in yoga in the West all the time is people think, I just need to become sattvic. Well, all three gunas have a very important function, both in the body and the mind. So we move from rajasic. The rajasic guna is what wakes us up in the morning. And then hopefully we run into more of a sattvic kind of period throughout the day. But the tamas guna is the one that allows us to go back to sleep. So some people think that tamas is all bad, but it has a function. My teacher always taught me there's nothing right or wrong in the universe. It's only right or wrong for you when you know how to apply it to your vikriti, your imbalances, your prakriti, and your mind. So stress is kind of one of the biggest conversations that are talked about in the mind, and what's causing so much mental disease today. In Ayurveda, stress is just not what is happening in the external world, in your physical environment, at work, or with your family. Stress encompasses everything that we do. So we can stress the body out by eating too much food or not eating enough food, exercising too much, sleeping too much, not sleeping enough. All of those things from a clinical aspect in Ayurveda are considered Hatha yoga, which means they're considered a stress on the system. That's why we're always just trying to balance out all the sensory impressions, how we eat food, when we eat food, how much we eat, the right kind of food, the wrong kind of food, because all of them will eventually have an impact on the mind. We are a mind, body, soul connected human being. For that to work properly, they have to work symbiotically together. So that means that the physical body needs to be in alignment with the subtle body. and the subtle body needs to be in alignment with the more astral body. But there isn't one way of doing that. I see practitioners that, think that what they do is the only thing. But I think as a community, we all contribute to a piece of how we can help a whole community heal by having multiple different kinds of disciplines understood by the average person in Canada to be able to heal themselves. So gross versus subtle versus astral body. So in Ayurveda, the way I was taught, nothing is inherently normal or abnormal. It only becomes abnormal when it adversely affects our physical health, our ability to be able to communicate with other people or work or be out in the community. Then it can become abnormal. But even in the point of being abnormal, it can still be within the normal range. One of the things we do in the West is we always compare everyone to ourselves. And we kind of think that's what the norm is. But it's not actually true. And as you get to know about Ayurveda and you understand the difference between the Vata dosha in and out of balance, the Pitta dosha in and out of balance, and the Kapha dosha, you realize they have very different, not only physical bodies, but very different temperaments. And it's not like the Vata dosha is anxious all the time, right? Which is, I have a lot of clients that feel that, or the Pitta dosha is always angry. That's out of balance. The Vata dosha, when they're in balance, are inspiring. The Pitta dosha, when it's in balance, is a leader and someone who can actually organize things. And the Kapha dosha, when it's in balance, is someone who can bring people together all the time. So they all have their inherent normal, and then they can have their inherent abnormal. So this picture here is because the middle of the picture is about the gross body, right? We need to make sure that all the tissues are balanced, as the definition of Ayurveda was pointed out at the beginning, that the malas, the wastes in our body, are working properly. And then we look at the subtle body. And so when we look at the subtle body, we can look at things like koshtas, which kind of cover the soul, chakras, which work up and down the body. And another thing that seems to be a misunderstanding is that the chakras are just inside of us, right? The chakras are an aura that lives all around us. It's also a physical entity in your body. So there's nerve plexus that are associated to specific doshas in the body. And there's energies that are specifically, I'll just hold on, I'm just letting someone in. And there's subtle bodies that are recognized by the doshas, the energies that are running through the body. So we need to make sure we take both of them into consideration when we're looking at the chakras. Sometimes people just look at the energetic body. They don't even consider how the nerve plexus in the body work in terms of healing. And sometimes we need both of them. And then the third piece is the astral body, right? Our consciousness, our connection to universal energy, which is something that the West is learning more about, but that also needs a connection with all three of those bodies for us to find our state of balance. The thing I believe we're trying to do in Ayurveda is to stop suffering. And the Buddha said, that's the first line in his first canon, is that we all suffer. And then the rest of his canons are about how we don't have to suffer. And that's the same with the Yoga Sutras. It says to calm the fluctuations of the mind, and then it goes on to talk about the 8 limbs of yoga that help calm the fluctuations in the mind. And I will tell you, asana is not number 1. And meditation is not number 2. Meditation is at the bottom. And if someone is going through the process of being able to balance out the body, they need to understand a little bit about the yamas and the niyamas, about how to live your life in the community and in your own home. When they're starting to understand about meditation, you move further down into the Yoga Sutras. And first, you need to understand a one-centered focus and to be able to withdraw your senses. And then you can start the true process of meditation. I have many people who come to me that are frustrated because someone tells them to go sit on a mat for 20 minutes and meditate. I think we're doing a disservice. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying from my point of view, when I see how to take a much slower approach and get people to understand how to have a one-centered focus, which means we can start to become mindful, which means we can start to understand who we are. We don't tend to look at our own behaviors as abnormal or how much we can hurt another human being because we have a justification for it. I believe there is no justification for it. There's a way to balance it and a way for all of us to become mindful of what we do. And, the gross and subtle and astral body, I think, can teach us that in a very big way. So in the gross body, we're going to use food. We're going to use lifestyle processes. In the subtle body, we're going to use mantra, and we're going to use, pranayama, and we're going to use mudra, or, whatever pieces we decide to use. So they integrate very well in terms of being able to help someone heal. Because you see, I believe we are not the healers. My client is their own healer. I have a big enough job here, I always tell my clients, me, right? But if I can be a guide to helping people to understand the process of what Ayurveda is about, then they can have the toolbox to heal themselves. So here's a little bit better depiction of the chakras and kind of their connection to different kind of energies in the body, whether it's, being basically feel trusted and safe in the world, or being able to communicate, or, whatever piece it may be. But it is not just about the fact that the throat chakra is the chakra of communication. Because the throat chakra also takes in all the nerves that are in the cervical spine, in the neck. And so sometimes we miss a piece of that because we're only looking at one piece. But even if we're looking at one piece, it's fabulous, right? It's a start for people to be able to start on their journey. So as I was saying earlier, in the West, we use pharmaceuticals a lot as one of the main therapies. The other piece that we use is a lot of talk therapy. And talk therapy, I believe, has its purpose. But if you have been doing talk therapy for 10 years and nothing has changed, you may want to look at another avenue to be able to start healing whatever that mental imbalance is in your body. So the West uses pharmaceuticals a lot. Ayurveda, we use herbs and formulas as part of the healing of the mind, but it is not the driving force behind it. If we just take herbs and we do not change how we eat, how we live, how we sleep, our brahmacharya, then those herbs are never going to truly create a healing in the gross and subtle body. So for me, I have to look at ahara. You can't really see that because I don't know why. We need to use ahara, so we need to use food. We need to use vihara. We need to use lifestyle processes, nidra, the sleep. Now the West has caught up to how important sleep is, and brahmacharya. So the way I was taught, brahmacharya is not just restraining from sexual activity. Brahmacharya is about balancing the energies in your body. Okay, so let's talk about food for a moment, right? So food and digestion have a very big impact on the doshas, the agni, the ojas, and the mind. So when someone starts to use food therapy in Ayurveda, we look in terms of the mind and the nervous system, we look at how do we start to balance the Vata dosha. If we're having depression issues, we need to look more at how do we balance the Kapha dosha. But I'm just using one example here. So if we're looking at food therapy as a way of healing the mind and the body, and especially in mental health issues, because mental health issues can mean too much stress and we've never been able to get out of it, a period of depression that we weren't able to get out of. So what we eat, where we eat, how much we eat, how we eat, if we cleanse or we don't cleanse, if our Agni is balanced, how balanced is the Sattva, Raja, and Tamasa in the body, how many of the 6 tastes do we put into our diet, and what are the primary gunas, that the qualities that we have in our diet, because they will have an effect on whether the doshas stay balanced or not, whether Agni gets manda, gets very weak, whether the ojas gets depleted. All of that is important in there. And, you know, we also know that the tastes have a very important function in the mind. The sweet taste creates more compassion and love in the mind. But too much sweet creates too much attachment in the mind. So that's a very Kaphic thing. If too much sour in the diet, you know, more pitta stuff, pitta is very discriminating. So sour is important to be able to discriminate in the buddhi, in the mind, to be able to make right decisions. But too much of the sour element can create envy and jealousy. And so every one of the 6 tastes will have an influence, not just on how the doshas are formed in the body and how digestion works, but it will also have an impact if we are using something in excess or not enough on how the mind functions. So we talked a little bit about food. Now we can talk a little bit about the viharas, how we live our life. So sleep is it's one of the 3 primary pieces in Ayurveda, right? In how we live our life. Nidra. So where we sleep, how much we sleep, when we sleep, all those things, what we do before we sleep, become important factors in being able to even help insomnia. People are very quick to go and get something for insomnia without even trying rubbing oil on their feet or having a protocol at bedtime. So I just would like to open it up for a minute if anybody has an answer. What do you think the number one thing in North America today allows for people to get insomnia and not sleep properly? Does anybody like to answer that? No, they don't have any takers.
I would say the screen.
You are so right. Who was that?
Or she. But
Oh,
we also have a comment, same thing, but it's the digital space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So yes, it's a screen, right? Not only the screen when we go to bed at night, but the screen when we wake up in the morning. We are habituated to behaviors that all of a sudden we do not even consider as part of why we can't sleep. And even regulating the circadian rhythms of going to bed at a certain time and waking up at a certain time. The average North American does not even know that as a part of the circadian rhythm, that you can change how the chemicals in your brain work, not by taking melatonin, but by just starting to regulate the circadian rhythms in your sleep. So sleep is a very important thing for healing, both healing the gross and the subtle and the astral body. So for people, you know, sometimes it's not about taking more medication. Brahmacharya, right? So that's balancing the energies in your body. part of that in the world that I live in is not just about sex, but how do you balance all the sensory impressions? Because in Ayurveda, food is what you eat, what you drink, what you breathe, and what you take in from all five senses. So sensory impressions are part of food in the system of healing in Ayurveda from Kerala that I have learned about. So we need to be able to balance that food, just like we balance the food in our digestive system, that we need to eat it, we need to be able to digest it, we need to be able to assimilate it, and we need to be able to eliminate through urine, feces, and sweat whatever isn't needed. Well, the sensory impressions being food are also needed to be brought in and assimilated, digested and either put into memory or let go or put into discrimination. And what we don't need needs to be eliminated. And that happens in the pitta time of night, between 10 and 2 in the morning. So if people are staying up all night on their phones or watching movies because they tell you they're night people, they are not able to eliminate some of the daily things that happened in that day that were never meant to stay in memory or meant to stay in discrimination, but get lodged in there or get lodged in the tissues because they do not have any kind of a rhythm in your life that's connected to the natural world. And then exercise obviously is important, right? Too much, not enough. I had a client today that was a marathon cyclist, and you can see what starts to happen when you overdo the body. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. He loved that sport, right? But sometimes we may have to pay the price. If we're not doing those kinds of things, we do need to know how to balance exercise. And just like everything else, everybody, all of us, we have excuses about why we do too much, or we don't have time, we're working, or whatever, right? But what's more important than this temple? Be it physical or subtle or astral, this is the vehicle that we move through the world and create our dharma. And yet, how we eat in the car, when we don't exercise or we exercise too much, there's no consideration to how important that temple is for healing. And then, from my perspective, being a yoga therapist, meditation, I don't start with meditation ever. As I said, I start with getting people to understand how to become mindful, how to do some basic pranayama, nothing. People love in the West getting into all the complicated types of pranayama because in the West, we think more is better, right? Or we're bored with this one, so we need something much more complicated to do. And that's why you see all that stuff on YouTube, right? Everybody wants to make pranayama their own. It doesn't belong to anybody. It belongs to the Yoga Sutras, right? But you need to understand some of the basic premises. And in the West, we have to get people to understand that those basic principles are what keep the temple in the perfect place to be able to live in the world and to be able to do our dharma. Community is important, helping others is important. Sometimes when people, I have people who come to me that have very serious illnesses. And sometimes one of the first things I will ask them to do is to go volunteer. And they'll look at me like I'm crazy. Sometimes we just need to get out of our own way. We don't need to stay in that obsessive pattern of what's going on with us, right? And to be able to help others sometimes takes us out of that space for a small amount of time. Okay, I just have a few pages left. And then as we know, most of us have some piece of Ayurveda in what we're doing in our lives is, we need a daily practice in the morning and at night. We need a seasonal practice. And then we also, for some of us, we use more of a kala practice. So, depending on whether we're moving through the winter solstice or the summer solstice, there's certain practices that go on. Or if there's a full moon and you're really influenced by the water element, there's certain practices that we do. But just to be able to create some kind of regularity, even if you do nothing but have a few practices in dinacharya, it means that the mind and the whole system will start to balance out the Vata dosha. Regularity is the most important thing, and not overdoing or underdoing, or especially overdoing things, is the most important thing to be able to balance the Vata dosha. And the Vata dosha runs the show. In the ancient texts, Vata is the only thing that moves the Pitta and the Kapha dosha. And then we use sensory therapy, and that's what we're going to talk about next week or next month. Rachel's going to do a piece on Abhyanga and how important touch and the types of oils we use on our body can balance out the mind. Because when the mind is imbalanced, the digestive system is imbalanced also. So all kinds of things are related to either the mind creating problems in the digestive system, or the digestive system being in the wrong place and creating problems that run through the blood and then infiltrate the mind or move into the mind in different kinds of ways. And then the next month after that, we're going to have sound therapy, which is one of the 5 senses that I don't think we pay enough attention to. Like if you just listen, so sound like a bowl has its own healing. So we can use instruments as sound therapy. We can use our voice in mantra as sound therapy. We can use humming. We can use all different techniques, either internally or externally through therapy, to be able to balance out the Vata dosha or increase the Kapha or balance out the Pitta dosha, to be able to create healing in the mental system. The same with pranayama, right? And light and gem therapy is something that people don't use too much in the West. We're starting to use it more. I use it a little bit. But even just exposure to the sun rising in the morning will change the dopamine and melatonin in your brain. So if you go for a walk, just as the sun is coming up, you will influence the chemicals in your brain, not just how the function of the brain works, but the chemicals in your brain and how they work. Now, you can do it at the end of the day when the sun is leaving, but it's not as powerful as if you do it first thing in the morning, whenever the sun is rising. So why don't we do this, right? Whoop. So the West has just a different worldview, right? When you talk to people about, I mean, there's so much controversy about food today, right? And I believe one of the reasons that that happens is because the food companies want us confused. Because the more confused we are, the more we will go back to our old ways of being and our old ways of eating. But not only in food, but in all aspects of Ayurveda, the Western view has a different worldview. So when I say that, that means that someone may have a different colored pair of glasses on. So the way they see an experience comes in through altered sensory impressions, be it the eyes, be it the ears, be it the nose. And so their worldview has changed, or their worldview has changed from a book. I see that more than anything. Someone goes to Indigo or wherever and buys this diet book that says it'll cure everything in the world. But they have never considered that they are an individual human being, and how can one food plan cure everything in the world, right? But we buy into it, or we buy into keto, or we buy into vegetarianism, because you know that Ayurveda is not a vegetarian science. We use meat in a very specific way. We use everything in a very specific way. And in a very specific way that is very different depending on your dosha, your prakriti, or if you have an imbalance in the system, you will be using all different kinds of things in very different ways. So if you are, really sick, like sometimes I will have somebody come to me that has been a vegan for a long time and they lost their menstrual cycle, they have no energy, they're dry, they're having issues, and I will ask them, are you opposed to changing your diet? Well, then, I've only had a few of them, but the number one thing I get is, no, I'm not changing my diet. So their worldview is their diet has nothing to do with lack of energy, menstrual cycle, dryness, any of that kind of stuff, constipation. So all of us have an opportunity to share some basic information about Ayurveda to be able to improve the mind and the body. Because they're both connected and the soul's connected, we know that we need to do a little bit of we need to give a little bit of information to everyone on different levels, whatever they need, to be able to get them to maybe open up their worldview a little bit from what has been ingrained in them forever. It's just like people just go to the health food store and they buy a supplement. And I'll ask them, has that really helped you? I go, no, but I know it's good for me. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes that's just a really good marketing technique. Second thing is, it's hard for us to ingrain new habits, right? It takes practice. So we're not looking for a goal or an outcome. We're just looking to practice new habits or new ways of being or new ways of eating until they become part of our cellular wisdom. And then we believe the mind is in control, that it knows everything. And probably 50% of the time, your mind is wrong. But we haven't been taught to be able to look at the different aspects of the mind to make a decision about whether something works for us, whether something makes us suffer or not. And sometimes we need time and we need a guide. So here's a few herbs. I'm going to talk a lot more about herbs with the lady that's going to do part 4 with me. So in Ayurveda, herbs are multifunctional, right? They will work on the mind, but they will also, work be as an adaptogen to decrease stress, or be able to work on constipation at the same time as they're working on the mind, or they're, more specifically a neurotropic, which is, geared to creating more balance in the mind. But there's also lots of foods like winter melon, kushmanda, that are really good for the mind and for the respiratory system, that can be made into food. So we will talk, Carrie and I will talk a lot more about how you can use foods to, as immune modulators or as adaptogens or as neurotropics, so that we're not having to take some kind of a formula or herb for the rest of our life. And sometimes we do, if people have been ill for a long time, there, is a capacity that maybe they will have to take something long term to keep an imbalance that can't be fixed in balance. But, my hope and my wish is that I can help people to heal themselves, and then they can use foods and their own toolbox to be able to keep their mind healthy and their body healthy. Because if the mind is not healthy, the body is not healthy. If the body is not healthy, the mind is not healthy. So there will be a much bigger discussion on foods and herbs and even spices and their effect. Spices are really long-term therapeutic medicine for your body. So this is where you find me. This is who I am. And I would like to thank you for coming and showing up and spending some time with me. And so I'm going to stop sharing. And we have 10 minutes or 9 minutes left. So does anybody have a question? Well, thanks, Sandeep. You can put it in the chat box if you don't want to say anything.
I want to say something.
Okay, Orshi?
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation, and I just love learning all the time and seeing the different perspectives. And what caught me very much is your emphasis on the synthesis of all of this. One cannot just have spices and expect their lives to change, or one thing to change only and not the other things. So it is in its balance and in its harmony. So thank you. Wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you. I think that, that a thing that is important that I learned and that anybody, like I do private work with practitioners in terms of helping them there with their business. And I think one of the most important things I can ever kind of, give to someone is the fact that they are not the healer. And if they are not the healer and they are willing to listen with their mind and their ears and their heart, they can come up with helping someone, right? So yes, and thank you very much for that. I think it's really important that we don't just focus on one piece. Because I know, Dr. J was telling me, my teacher from Kerala for the last 10 years, that he's going back to India to train doctors how to get out of the giving formulas. Because what's happened, even in India, is Ayurvedic doctors are now not looking at food and lifestyle. They're just giving more formulas. And so he basically read the riot act to the group of doctors he knows and said, that's not an acceptable behavior. That's not what Ayurveda has ever taught anybody. Is it is just like turning into a natural pharmaceutical industry and giving
So
things.
true.
So
So true. And even in my practice, what I see is that people, while they approach us, for their healing journeys to be guided, they don't want us to be the healer. They want themselves to be the healer of themselves, and that is just the correct way of being. So I think that's the journey for us to understand that even us professionals, we just are there to guide them so that
yeah.
they become self-healers of themselves. And I really truly believe that's the future of health care. It's the self-health care.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't think there's any other way that a human being can actually heal themselves because they are the only ones that know themselves. It's just they have forgotten. They don't remember who they are.
Mm.
So if we can help them to remember who they are, and we can all work as a community to do that, now we have a chance for the whole community in Canada to start to heal itself. Does anybody else have any questions or comments or something they didn't like or did like? I mean, I'm okay if you didn't like what I had to say, I mean, that's being a big girl, right? Not everything has to resonate with everybody. That's just how I've been taught, over the years and
I don't,
how I'm seeing
mm.
results.
I don't want to take over from anyone else, so speak up if you guys have something. But I have had another thing. I really loved what you said, which was nothing is inherently normal or abnormal. And I see this also every day in my practice, where if it feels right, if you know that you're doing well, then it's good. Then you don't need to change what's good, what feels good and harmonious. So I love that one as well.
Oh, thank you.
Mm.
And if we're going to do something, that isn't really that good for us, eat a bucket of ice cream in the middle of the night and in the middle of the winter, to raise the kapha, right? It's not a good thing to do. But I always tell my clients, if you're going to do that, love every minute of it. Your digestion will work better if you're not beating yourself up. But if you do that every day, now you have created an imbalance.
Yeah.
If you've just done it once, love it, right? Or I'm going to have that glass of wine and I know it's not going to let me sleep, right? That's me. If I have a glass of red wine, I'm not sleeping.
Exactly. I
So
agree.
occasionally I look at the glass of red wine in a group of people, and I'll go, okay, I'm going to suffer tonight for one night. Now, if I did that every day, that would be a whole different thing in terms of how I'm going to imbalance the pitta dosha in me, right?
Mhm.
And if you have a, if you, I believe, this is just always from me, from my teaching, but if you have a client that is adverse to doing something, do not make them do that right now. Find a little bit different path because you're fighting against them, right? Like I have people that come to me with cancer and they have huge growths. Do you know the first thing I will tell them? Get to the hospital. They see online, oh, I'm going to go on a juice diet and I'm going to get rid of that huge cancerous thing in my breast or in my stomach. That is not true as far as I'm concerned. Modern medicine has a place. I tell them, you need to get that fixed and then you need to come back and see me so that doesn't happen again. But when we think we have too much power, that we're going to be able to control that, then sometimes we can do a huge injustice. And occasionally it will work, right? That's where those videos come from. Do the juice diet and you'll get rid of every cancer cell in your body. But that means you also have a change of mental attitude. And there's a whole bunch of other things going on. So just be mindful that we have our place and everything else in the universe has its place. And we just need to learn how to use all of it in an appropriate way. Okay, you guys. Well, if no one else has anything else, let me just see what's in the chat. Yes, Nasi is a really good idea. Other that's a whole other conversation that could take a week. I mean, Nasia, depending on what type of oils you use, has an influence on the hypothalamus. But just like everything, I think one of the things that people will go online and see, oh, I'm going to go buy Amutylum and I'm going to take it all the time. It's, a daily nose drop. The problem is they forget they have a cold and they keep taking it and then they get bacterial infection because they don't have anybody to guide them. All they see is that one piece of, yes, I will use oils, right, on a daily basis to keep everything working well. And that's the great part of being able to let your clients understand that they need a little bit of guidance. They can go do a whole bunch of stuff, but there's still some guidance. Because even herbs in Ayurveda, right? People go and they buy ashwagandha powder, they mix it in some water and they drink it. That's bad. Ashwagandha is a root. It needs to be decocted. It's not just mixed in some water. Let's sit there for a while and drinking it. So you need to even know if you want to affect the mind or the body, how are you going to give that herb to another human being? What's their digestion like? How much ama do they have, right? And is it a root that's really hard to digest, just like licorice, right? So, but yes, I agree. Nasiya is a really good thing. Yeah, sometimes people deal with guilt. Very good, Monica. I think that's one of the hugest pieces that we can help people work around is where does the root of that guilt come from, right? Because once people begin to understand where some of their emotions come from, right, in their worldview, which maybe isn't really it's helping them to suffer, not helping them to get rid of that suffering. And so sometimes it's just a very gentle way of being able to have a discussion about the worldview around guilt, right? And I mean, like every single piece of Ayurveda, there's, 100 ways or 1,000 ways that someone will manifest guilt or how it will become part of their worldview or it will become part of their their glasses, right, that they have on. But it's a really good point. Okay, so we're done. Thank you very much. You have my information. If you have any questions or anything like that that I can help you with, I'm always here for the community. And if you're not a member of our association, we would very much appreciate you becoming a member and joining in on the community of practitioners and people that can help Ayurveda grow in Canada. So thank you very much, and thank you for all your kind words. It was a joy to be able to spend some time with you, and have a good evening. Take care. Good night.